My name is Jeff Walsh. I am the CEO and founder of Sooth.fyi, or Sooth for short. And on the call here with us, we have my colleague Luke, who is going to just be off camera. He's going to monitor the Q&A, which is open. So if you have questions throughout, please drop them in the chat. He's also going to do a little bit of screen sharing throughout this, just so there's some visuals for you all to see. And then joining us today as our special guest is Sophia Rubinson, who is a NewsGuard analyst and senior editor of the NewsGuard Reality Check newsletter. Uh, Very excited to have her here for a couple of reasons. Number one, I love interviewing people, but I think this is really special because we are in Media Literacy Week, and NewsGuard plays a very important role in our information ecosystem. And I mean ours as in the collective ours, not just Sooth. If you're unfamiliar with our platform, this is not going to be a demo. We actually will show you one of our features just to facilitate the conversation with Sophia. But we, as a student-oriented internet search platform, we have partnered with NewsGuard. So they are actually a partner of ours, and we share the NewsGuard reliability ratings on our platform. So if you are familiar with our platform, you're definitely going to have seen the NewsGuard reliability ratings. And so a couple of things to note. Number one, yeah, they're a partner, and so we have aligned like commercial interests, but more importantly, both of our organizations are based on trust and transparency, right? And so it's really important for us to bring you someone like Sophia to peel back the onion and give you all more insight into not just the reliability ratings themselves, but also like the struggle and the complexity of coming up with those ratings and how do they deal with that internally. And then also some of the other facets of the NewsGuard business around misinformation. That is going to be really exciting. We're going to get to that like in the latter half of the conversation. Okay, so I think with that kind of intro, Sophia, I'd love to turn this over to you just to give you a couple of minutes, introduce yourself, tell us like, your background, what do you do at NewsGuard, your role and all of that good stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's such a pleasure to be here during Media Literacy Week. So as you said, my name is Sophia Rubinson. I work at a company called NewsGuard. I'm primarily an analyst there. So what that means is I'm tasked with rating the reliability of news and information websites. Anything from the New York Times that, everyone knows to small local newsrooms. To even AI-generated content farms that we see are popping up with, more prominence nowadays. Another thing that I do at NewsGuard, as you mentioned, we also track misinformation that's spreading online. We have a continuously updated database of the provably false narratives that are gaining traction on social media and on news websites that we are coming across daily. So I'm also responsible for doing that. So I'll track how are these narratives originating? Is it a social media user? Is it a misinterpretation of a document, a government document, or is it an AI generated image that was produced by a shady news organization? We'll also track how these narratives are spreading. So in what circles online are they gaining traction? And also we put together a very comprehensive debunk of that claim. And we have a very high bar for what we consider to be provably false. Something
And
else I do.
oh, sorry to interrupt you, but
No.
right there when you're talking about the provably false media
Mhm.
narratives, those are your fingerprints,
Yes,
correct?
we call them false claim fingerprints. And basically these are just snapshots of a very prominent false claim that we're seeing gaining traction online. And these could range from just very believable false claims, so a misinterpretation of a government document of something that's going on currently, to very malicious like Russian disinformation campaigns that are trying to say that the election in Moldova, a small European country, is corrupt. So it's a very wide range. Something else that I do at NewsGuard, we have a newsletter that's public facing called Reality Check. It's based on Substack, and we put out newsletters daily that try to educate the public on, either these false narratives that are spreading online. So it's maybe something that you'll see on your social media feed that day. We try to get you that debunk in real time, but also that focuses more on trends. So, for example, we just put out a report about OpenAI's new text to video generator, Sora 2, and we tested that generator's ability to produce videos that would advance some leading false claims that we are seeing online. So we have a wide range of offerings that we have there.
Yeah.
So
We're
sorry.
gonna get, I have a few questions for you
Mhm.
regarding misinformation, AI generated video.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's gonna be interesting. The NewsGuard reality check newsletter, that is something that everyone can sign up for,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Yep.
I strongly encourage you to sign up if you're interested. I've noticed an uptick. It does seem like it's almost daily now that you guys are
Mhm.
pushing out those newsletters, and they're great. We're actually going to discuss one newsletter in particular from a couple of weeks ago, but I don't want to spoil that surprise. So we'll get to that in a sec. So you had mentioned your role at NewsGuard. So you do ratings or have done in the past
Mhm.
ratings for specific news sites.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the internal organization of NewsGuard? So, for example, just to clarify, is Sophia Rubinson the only person that touches a reliability rating for, say, the New York Times?
Mhm.
Or is there a kind of team that has checks and balances? Is there an editor above you? Is it a group kind of process to make sure that the standards are being kind of consistent across everyone you're rating or your team is rating and other teams over here that are rating these other sources? Just talk us through a little bit about how it's internally organized from a rating perspective.
Of course. Yeah. So it definitely is not just me that's going to be rating any given website. Doesn't matter what the website is, even if it's something like the New York Times that's super well known to a very small website that no one, might have heard of. We have almost always at least five people looking at every single rating that we put out. So the first layer is it goes to an analyst. So like me, we are usually the youngest people at the organization. We'll be tasked with doing a first look at the website, going through our nine standards of credibility and transparency that I'm sure we're going to be talking about a little bit later. We'll go into more detail, but I'll do that first assessment. And we try to also assign these websites based on people's areas of expertise. So we're divided into a couple different teams at NewsGuard. I'm on the US politics team, so I'll mainly be assigned sites that deal with US politics, but we also have teams all over the world. We focus particularly in obviously the US, which is what I focus on, but also in France, Germany, Italy, Austria, Australia, Canada, and a few other countries. So we have people specifically that are well, informed about those markets, so that they're able to rate those websites properly. We also have a team that focuses specifically on health. We rate a lot of websites that deal with health information. So we have experts in that. And we also have experts that deal with foreign disinformation, specifically from Russia, China, and Iran. So we have, we try to assign websites based on people's expertise. But after the analyst does that initial, assessment of the website, that goes to a first editor who has a little bit, more experience. They've been at the company for longer. They're able to, take a more holistic approach when looking at these ratings and making sure that we're being consistent. After they're looking at the rating that was drafted, it goes to a managing editor, so someone who has, a lot of experience. Usually, these are all of our managing editors are veteran journalists in the industry for 40 plus years. They've been working at organizations like Reuters and the AP, and now they work at NewsGuard. So these are people that have a lot of experience in the industry. And then after they edit the draft, we get all of them are looked at by our two CEOs, and
Oh,
they
wow.
are also themselves veteran journalists who make sure, they're not doing like line by line edits, but they'll make sure that these labels are meeting all of our standards and that they are consistent across all the sites that we rate.
Okay, and that's fascinating. So all of those different layers. And then what happens? So at this point in NewsGuard's life cycle, you've rated quite a few, right? Or like, I think globally it's roughly 30,000 or so.
Yes.
So a lot of the work you're doing now is reassessing
Mhm.
existing ratings.
Yes.
Is that true? Is that
Yes. So
okay?
what we do now is we try to do it once a year. We will update our ratings for every website that we have. So what that means is in order to uphold any of our findings, so for example, if we found that a site repeatedly publishes false or egregiously misleading content, we'll have to find new recent examples in order to uphold that finding. If we determine that the site now has improved their practices and we cannot find examples of provably false claims or egregiously misleading information on the website, then we would remove that, you know, fail, finding, and we would then pass them for that criteria. So that's done annually, and that also goes through the different layers of edits that I mentioned earlier.
So, Luke, maybe this is a good time for you to share your screen. Sorry, folks, I should have asked them to do this like a minute ago, but if you're not familiar with the ratings that Sophia is referencing, what we're going to do now is we're going to share a screen. We are going to show you our platform. Now, what you're looking at here, you should be able to see Luke's screen. This is our misinformation tool called Domain Checker. Okay, so this is not our main search platform. This is Domain Checker, which sits within our misinformation toolkit, where you can type in literally any website on the internet. And if it has a NewsGuard reliability rating, we'll show it an all sides media bias rating if it has one, and then some other data points. So we'll give you an example. Luke, can you go ahead and type in CNN.com? Okay, great. So folks, perfect. The kind of in the middle of the screen, off to maybe offset a little bit on the left, we see that box that has got a blue score with an 80 in it. And kind of that sits within a bigger box that has the ratings criteria that Sophia was just referencing. Credibility is on the left-hand side, and there's five credibility metrics, and then four related to transparency. And Sophia had just mentioned the first credibility metric does not repeatedly publish false or egregiously misleading content. So just to orient everyone, that this is what she is talking about with the ratings criteria, these 9 ratings criteria. Um, there is more information on this rating and every individual rating, and we can actually access that underlying nutrition label, as they call it, by clicking on that button, full nutrition label. We're not going to do it here. Maybe that's a little teaser for you. If you haven't done it, come check us out and we'll walk you through it. But it is the full research report on, in this case, CNN. Okay, so Sophia, as we see, just taking CNN as an example, it's not a perfect score, right?
Yes.
It's not a 100, it's an 80. Lou, can you scroll up a little bit just so folks can see that we're looking at CNN? Yep, thanks. Um, okay, I have some questions for you on this,
Mhm.
on these ratings, on these criteria. Um, Internally,
Mhm.
which of these tend to have the most discussion?
It's a great question. I would say that the one that CNN does fail for credibility, which is handles the difference between news and opinion responsibly, that's one that generates a lot of discussion because there are a lot of nuances on the way that we apply this criteria. So, just to clarify, because a lot of people have a misconception about this, NewsGuard does not penalize any site for having a perspective. We're not in that business. We rate a lot of websites that have a clear left-leaning bias or a clear right-leaning bias, and they get perfect scores. However, that's not the case, for example, for CNN. So what this criteria means is that a site either does not disclose their perspective if they have one, or even if they do disclose that perspective, we will penalize a site if they do not properly label their content as opinion if it contains opinionated language. So that would mean if an article is labeled as news, it doesn't otherwise say that it's a commentary or analysis, and then it goes on to include opinionated language. And if we see repeated instances of that occurring on the website, then it would fail this criteria. In this case, I'm not 100% familiar with the CNN label, but I would venture a guess to say that this site fails this criteria because they might not disclose that they have a left-leaning perspective, and we assess that by looking holistically at the content that they've published in a given year. And if the selection of the stories tend to focus on left-leaning issues and maybe omits issues of importance to the right, then we would determine that that site has a left-leaning perspective. And if it doesn't disclose that, let's say on an about page, by saying that they focus on progressive issues or using wording similar to that, then we would fail the site for that criteria.
So that's really fascinating because, hey, Luke, can you maybe zoom in a little bit? Just because it's pretty small. So perfect. Thank you. Um, so you are referencing the bias of a publisher, which do which means that you must track it internally, but yet you don't share what those observed biases might be. Like we don't see it in the rating, for example.
So, if you go to the full nutrition label, that's a very detailed report, and we will very clearly say what we determine the bias of the site to be, whether that be something that they disclose themselves. So we see tons of
Got it.
websites that will say, this is a conservative website. We publish conservative opinion, or they say progressive opinion. Or if they don't disclose that perspective, we go in a lot of detail saying exactly what we determine the bias to be, and we give examples. So it's not just that this is our finding and we don't have an explanation. No, we give very specific examples, either of that demonstrate how they select content that always focuses on one side, or maybe only presents speakers and only interviews people who are from, let's say in this case, maybe the Democratic side. Or we will show examples of content that's labeled as news, and then it contains opinionated content, and we'll quote that specific opinionated content in order to, make sure we're showing our work and make sure that people can trust our ratings.
Fascinating. Okay, so just so we're clear, the and I agree with you that the full nutrition label does often mention it if it is obvious. But that doesn't play a role in the rating itself.
No.
It
Mhm.
only really comes into play when you are doing that assessment of the editorial selection,
Mhm.
and if they're providing enough perspective that is, from the other side of their stated or maybe, hidden bias.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. That's really helpful. So another reason folks to click on the full nutrition label is to get a better understanding of the potential bias. And what might be interesting is to see if it matches with the all sides media bias rating.
Mhm.
I have some anecdotal evidence just from using our platform so much and seeing all of these, that there is pretty good alignment, but there's oftentimes or sometimes they're not fully aligned. Your internal assessment and the all sides media bias rating, which I think is kind of interesting. Okay, so handles the difference between news and opinion responsibly. Um, any other of these criteria whether it's credibility or transparency, that you care to comment on regarding the challenges in addressing these and solving for it?
Yeah. So another criteria that is a little bit tricky as an analyst is one that you might not think would be that hard is website discloses ownership and financing. So, the best websites that, our standard for this is that a website needs to disclose somewhere prominently on their site who their owner is. Or if it's a nonprofit, they also need to disclose who their major donors are. We love to see this on an about page. Sometimes it's on the bottom of the home page. Those are great locations where we think that's a very prominent place where it's very user friendly, where you would expect to see this disclosure. And this is important because when you're assessing the information that you're seeing online, you want to know who's behind it, who's funding it. Is this an organization with a political perspective? Do they get political donations from one side of the aisle? These are things that are very important when you're assessing credibility. Um, it's great when it's very prominently disclosed, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes even highly credible sites, they just won't include their owner anywhere on the website. So that's where a lot of the reporting process comes in. We have a lot of different tools that we use in order to do some research, whether that be just on the domain, who was registering this domain when it was first registered. If we can find information about the editors and maybe their connections, that's where we have to do a little bit of deeper reporting. And
Mm.
that information that we find for the ownership is always at the top of the full nutrition label. You'll be able to see, exactly how we were reporting on who the owner of a site is, who the donors are, if we're able to find that, and the sources that we are using for that as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm convinced. Maybe we should click on the full nutrition label just to give folks, if you've never seen this before. Lou, can you click on full nutrition label just so people can see this? So voila, here we go. This is what the full nutrition label looks like. And if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the scroll bar, the vertical scroll bar. There's quite a lot of information here. Um, so we don't have to go through it all, but uh, at the very bottom are all those hyperlinks that Sophia was talking about. So it's not just about, hey, take NewsGuard's word for it, but they actually share all of the hyperlinks. There you go. Um, okay, thanks, Luke. We can go back to the other tab. So one of the things that kind of has dawned on me over the months and year of our relationship with NewsGuard and just becoming very familiar with these, when it comes to media literacy,
Mhm.
is that, I know a lot of the practice in the classrooms has been teaching lateral reading and looking at multiple different sources to triangulate, right? And to try to fact check
Mhm.
a story. If you see something and you want to fact check it, like find it on other websites and which is, a great habit to do. So you're not just, believing everything you read for the first time, but you're kind of fact checking it yourself. The one thing that does leave out is, or can leave out, because students aren't going to dedicate, all the time that might be required, is to go and look for this type of information on a website, like ownership and financing, for example. Right? Because if I'm a student and I am doing my lateral reading as I've been taught, and I'm trying to check the story across a bunch of different sources. Um, am I also looking at the ownership and the financing of
Mhm.
those sources, right? Because it can, if you don't do a deep enough kind of research and discovery process on your own as a student, um, you might be fooled into thinking, oh, this story checks out. And so therefore this publisher is reliable when isn't necessarily the case. Maybe you happen to come across a reliable story, but it's otherwise not a great source of truth or reliable information.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, not really a question in there for you. Sorry. That was just a personal observation I had. Okay, let's talk about the internal process at NewsGuard, because a lot of our users rely on these and they use them to teach their students um, media literacy, right? And to, your the scorecard right there, or the all of those 9 metrics, is a what we believe is a great roadmap, kind of, journalistic best practices. And, it forces kind of the good habits and muscle memory on students. If they look at this enough times, it's gonna, get kind of beaten into them like, hey, these are the types of things I need to look at.
Mhm.
Um, Now, when you guys are doing them internally, we just discussed, hey, these are the ones that typically are kind of hard for us.
Mhm.
Internally, we want to have, we as the users of these ratings, and our customers, we want to have high confidence.
Mhm.
So what does the disagreement process look like in NewsGuard? Like,
Mhm.
whistleblower, like, hey, I strongly object to this
Mhm.
rating for CNN,
Mhm.
because I think you, my boss, are being biased, or
Mhm.
you're missing the bigger picture, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
How does NewsGuard deal with that internal disagreement process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and one that we get asked a lot. What we do is we have a daily team-wide call. So that's including everyone from people on the business side, tech team, to, our editorial staff like myself. We meet and we discuss the either the new nutrition labels that we're drafting or some, very pertinent updates. Maybe there's a major gonna be a major change to a website's rating. Those will be discussed on that daily call, and any issues that any staff member may have with a rating that they disagree with will be discussed then. I will say that we have a lot of training that goes into, before you draft your first label, we have a lot of internal documents that have, a plethora of examples of exactly when sites will pass and when they will fail. We have to always show our work, as you saw, that our labels are very, very long and sometimes tedious to read through because we show so much work. So we really don't take lightly any time that we're failing a site. It has to have a lot of proof behind it. We have to feel very confident about that rating. And of course, there are disagreements that come up. I would say a big one is sometimes how a site is disclosing their perspective. So if a site says that they're an America First site, is that a clear enough disclosure that they're conservative? If they say that they, are pro-democracy, is that enough disclosure that they are a liberal site? So those are things that will come up and will generate some disagreement. But once we reach a decision, we apply that decision across all of the sites that we rate. So we're very consistent. We have a very good way of keeping track of these decisions that we make to make sure that we're not awarding one site for, the same thing that we're dinging or,
Yep. Penalizing.
penalizing another site on. So we try
Yeah.
to be very extremely consistent because we know that, our credibility relies on these ratings being consistent. So we take a lot of time and pride in the work that we do in that way.
So how do you personally deal with your own biases
Mhm.
and, political bias, affiliation, what, like, you know you're human, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with it? I know NewsGuard makes you sign a disclaimer or a waiver of some kind, but I think it'd be beneficial for folks to understand how someone who does this for a living,
Mhm.
how you deal with it, and how hard is it? Like, how, please share.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, that's something that definitely goes, I would say it starts at the hiring process. So there's a lot of people who want to be journalists and they have, they are more advocacy journalists, so they have a perspective that they want to advance. And they are better suited at an organization that has that perspective. And there's a lot of journalistic outlets that, properly disclose their perspective and they report from that perspective. And that would be a great organization for them. I would say it starts with us, the recruitment process. We want people who want to be objective, who are, not politically motivated. As you mentioned, all of our staff members have to sign an agreement saying that we won't publish or post any political content on social media. We have processes in place to make sure that our employees are abiding by that. We definitely don't want to be perceived as biased in any way. But of course, as you mentioned, you have internal biases that you can't get rid of. Everyone has opinions on what's going on in our government and in the world. So How we, check for that is we have our two CEOs come from two different, parts of the political spectrum. So we have Gordon Krovitz. He was the former publisher of the Wall Street Journal. That's obviously a conservative paper. And then my other CEO, his name is Stephen Brill. He, was, at one time very prominent in Democratic causes, and he's known for that. So we have two people that are the heads of our company who are from different political perspectives or backgrounds. And same thing with, different members of our staff. And you can see all of that disclosed on our website. If you click, go to our website, we have a whole team section. Everybody there, we have a bio for them, and we also have a disclosure section for everyone. So if they ever worked for an advocacy organization, if they ever made any political
Got it.
donations,
Got it.
prior to joining NewsGuard. Once you
Ha-
join, you obviously cannot do those things, but
Got
that's
it.
all
Got it.
disclosed there.
But how do you personally, like,
Mhm.
and again, I'm thinking about students, teachers, educators, like a lot of them are, have to do this. Well, I mean, frankly, we all need to be doing this, our own media literacy, right? We have to be smart in the type of information that we're engaging with.
Yeah.
But we all have biases.
Mhm.
And do you have any tricks or any advice for you personally, like having done this for, so long, doing it to get paid to do it?
Mhm.
How do you sleep well at night knowing that like your personal bias is not coming into play here?
No, it's a great question. I mean, of course, like I mentioned, I have a personal bias, so does everyone else. And sometimes when you're, let's say for me, for example, when I'm on social media and I'm monitoring, let's say, for example, X for false claims, and I see something that confirms, my bias or what something that is, I perceive as positive. Something that you have to learn is not to just scroll past that and say, oh, that must be true because, I want it to be true. A lot of times those are the claims that I try to scrutinize more because I want to make sure that my opinions are based in fact. It's something I pride myself on. So whenever I see something that tends to confirm my bias, I want to be even more scrutinize that claim more,
Hmm.
because I know that I have that bias. So I think that's a great practice for anyone to have.
It's almost counterintuitive.
Exactly. So, a lot of times when you're on social media and you see something you disagree with, you'll be like, no, this can't be true. This must, that's not what I was
Right.
taught. That's not what I believe.
Right.
Those are the things that people tend to, argue about in the comment section or to take some time fact checking themselves. But I would encourage you to also do that for claims that you come across that confirm your perspective. Because, we see misinformation on both sides of the aisle, almost equally. It comes in different forms for sure. But, there's no side of the political spectrum that's safe from misinformation. So it's important to be critical of things that, confirm your perspective.
Awesome. And I'm excited to get to the misinformation piece shortly. Luke, you can stop sharing your screen now, by the way. Thanks. Um, okay, just a couple more rapid fire questions on this, like the ratings process and NewsGuard, and then we're gonna get to misinformation. Um, do you guys use generative AI or AI internally at all for any of this work?
No, so we rely on humans, not algorithms, as our saying. We want to make sure that a human analyst is looking at, these sites. We don't rely on AI to, vet these sites or see what kind of content they're publishing.
Okay. Not surprising. Um, what type of criticism has NewsGuard received? I know there's been some specific kind of accusations, but like
Yep.
if you could, we don't need to get into specific accusations,
Mhm.
but just can you, generalize what kind
Yeah.
of criticisms you guys have received, and are they valid?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very prominently we were accused by some high-ranking Republicans in Congress of, having an anti-conservative bias. They would cite some of our ratings on some very well-known conservative websites and say, because these sites specifically have low ratings, that means that we are biased against
Mhm.
conservatives. But
Mhm.
at the same time, not as much at the current moment, but in years prior we have gotten the same exact criticism criticism from liberal, activists who say that we have, rated some sites that have a very liberal perspective, negatively, and that means that we have an anti-liberal bias.
Hmm.
So, we think that because we're getting accused on both sides of the aisle, that
You're
must
doing
mean that
something
we're
right.
doing something right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we're able to counteract all those claims by showing tons and tons of conservative websites that have perfect NewsGuard ratings, and same thing for liberal websites. It's not about the bias of the website, as we talked about earlier. That's not a consideration. If the site is clearly disclosing their perspective, they will pass that criteria all the time. And they just need to disclose it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. I, and then the last question regarding the ratings, we don't want to give people a false sense of security, right? Like, and some of the questions slash criticism that we get as a platform for students is, well, if you're showing these ratings and they're living in a walled garden, so to speak, when they're on our platform, like how are they learning? How are they getting, improving their media literacy skills and their information literacy? And and well, obviously we, our, a counter argument to that is number one, it gives them assurance, right? So in the moment, if you're trying to learn about a topic, you don't want to have to spend all your time trying to figure out if that source is even credible, right? You actually want to learn about the topic at hand, not always be practicing media literacy. Otherwise, you won't know anything other than media literacy. But we also giving them access to the nutrition label and the scorecard and all the information. It allows them to just know what good looks like, right? And but at the same time, we don't want to, it's important for people to understand like these are moving targets, right?
Yes.
Some of those criteria are kind of subjective, right? Because even your word choice in describing it, like does not repeatedly publish false or egregiously missing.
Mhm.
Well, what does repeatedly mean, right?
Mhm.
Once, twice, 50 times, like so there is some subjectivity in there. So it's important for us to convey that to our users and the students is just like, yeah, there's no perfect answer here. It's about best practices and just, getting really good at understanding what good looks like.
Yes. Mhm.
Do you, would you agree with that? And like, has working in NewsGuard and working on these scores,
Mhm.
has that, how do you feel about the fact that this is like nothing's perfect, right? It's a bit of a moving target, and some
Mhm.
of the stuff is debatable. Not debatable like, oh, if you rated something 100, but it should be a 0. I'm not talking about that extreme, but I mean like when people are looking at these scores,
Mhm.
they should approach them with, you know, a level of confidence because we've just had this conversation and you explained a lot about the internal processes, but there's also still, you the reader, you the user, you have a responsibility as well. Like
Mhm.
we're not taking that from you, and this is not easy what you guys do. um so I guess my question is, would you agree that, like, now having done this for several years, have you how much, what is your appreciation for media literacy and
Mhm.
not necessarily applying a score, like
Mhm.
quantifying a website, but
Mhm.
just overall like understanding if a source is a reliable source or an unreliable source?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And like you said, I mean, I'm sure if you search hard enough, you will find a site with a, perfect NewsGuard rating that has at one time published a false claim. And on the flip side, we have a lot of sites that we rate pretty lowly, that, we found to repeatedly publish false claims. And sometimes they publish information that's completely accurate. So as you're saying, this isn't a perfect system, but what we're really trying to do is what we call pre-bunking. So saying, we're not going to be able to vet every single article that this website publishes, but what we can do is provide you with a general assessment of the practices of the site for you to use as you wish. This isn't, something that's meant to take away your critical thinking skills and your ability to assess information on your own. Rather, I wouldn't say, students can learn a lot from reading actually our nutrition label, looking past just the checklist and actually reading, the reasoning behind our processes. I think that it gives a lot of insight into how professional journalists are able to assess the credibility of news sources. Because as we're talking about, it is very difficult and it is somewhat subjective to say, that it's repeatedly publishing false claims. Of course, we have our own, definitions of what that means that we apply consistently, but still someone might disagree if they have different standards for
Yeah.
what that means. But yeah.
How, how has your work and your experience working at NewsGuard, how has it changed your personal media habits?
Mhm. It's a great question too. I mean, I think that I'm very just generally skeptical now when I'm online. I do rely on NewsGuard nutrition label scores. I would say that's, a change that happened when I started working here. I find them to be very useful, especially because we're seeing a lot of also, bad actors, specifically from Russia, Russian operatives who are trying to also create domain names that mimic, real sources. So this is a made up example, but instead of saying like nytimes.com, it would say nytimes.us, or a slightly different domain name. That if you saw that at first glance, you would think maybe it's the New York Times, and maybe the website will mimic the layout of the New York Times, but that publishes misinformation. We're seeing that a lot, and that's something I didn't know about before working at NewsGuard. So I would say, I'm very skeptical of the information I see online, especially on social media. I'm always, if I see a claim and it doesn't have a source, immediately skeptical of that. A lot of times if someone is credible and they are saying something that's provocative and could, be, very
Yeah.
groundbreaking, they'll cite their sources for that. And if they don't, that's, something that raises an immediate red flag.